the Anbernic RG351P, RG280V, and M, RG353M, and PS, RG35XX, and the RG405M. Do you know what these all have in common? They're some of the best handhelds that Anbernic has ever made. And now we have a new addition, the Anbernic RG556, which might top them all. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. Today we're going to be reviewing the Anbernic RG556. And what's special about this device is it actually has a 5.5-inch OLED 1080p screen. And yeah, I said OLED and 1080p, which is completely abnormal for a retro handheld in this space, especially one at under $200 US, so it's a really good value. And it has enough power to play GameCube, PlayStation 2, 3DS, PSP, and all of that. So it's actually pretty powerful as well. Let's start this off strong. This is by far and away probably the best handheld that you can buy for under $200 US. And I don't think there's anything else really close to it in my personal opinion and what I value, and we'll talk about that. But this is just one of those top devices, and it's a combination of so many different things, and let's just get into it. Anybody familiar with my channel knows that I don't get impressed that easily. So when a device comes along that actually does impress me, which has been probably only a handful in the last year, it's surprising. And so for this review, we're going to shuffle things around, and I'm going to start with the great, the good, and then we'll talk about the bad. And let's just start with the great. The very first thing that stood out to me when I was holding this device for the very first time is how absolutely comfortable it is to hold. Now, I have the blue model here, and I don't know about the black model. From what I understand, it might be using a different plastic and all of that. But this blue model is probably, and actually not even probably, it is the most comfortable handheld that I've ever held. This is just peak comfort and ergonomics in so many different ways. The plastic itself has TPU shell feel. So when I say TPU, anybody familiar with a case on a phone, those TPU plastics, that's exactly what this feels like, that kind of rubbery sort of feel. And it makes it so good to hold that you could hold this for hours and hours and hours and you won't get tired. It's one of those. And it is just absolutely fantastic with how they did it, especially the finger holds on the back that just curve to your hands. This is a spectacular device when it comes to ergonomics and comfort, and one of my favorites, or if not my favorite at this point. For complete reference, my previous top devices for comfort would have been the TrimUI Smart Pro and the Anbernic RG353 PS or P. Those two, in my mind, are really comfortable devices, but this just takes it up a notch to a whole different level, and it is completely comfortable. Once again, this is all my opinion on the blue model. From what I know, the black model has a different texture, but I've praised Anbernic in the past for their designs and for their ability to just prioritize comfort and ergonomics, and this is kind of like another culmination of that, and I've said that before, but it just keeps going. They did it with the RG Arc. That is a very comfortable device. They're doing it here, and it's awesome to see that they actually put the thought into comfort when it comes to designing these handhelds. It's something that a lot of other companies just don't do. But that's all fine and well. As soon as you turn on the device, it gets even better because there is an OLED 5.5-inch 1080p screen greeting you. This is one of those really good OLED screens, and it's fantastic to see that it's not a compromise in any way. This is the best screen out of any device in the under $200 category that you'll find. And actually, I might even take that up a little bit higher, because until you get to a Switch OLED or a Deck OLED, nothing really beats this screen in just how good it is. Now, we could stop here, and we have the comfort, we have the ergonomics, and we have the OLED, but it keeps going from there. The device keeps getting better. Performance-wise, we're running a Unisoc T820 chip, and it has a Mali GPU. It's fancy words, but what this basically means is this device can do GameCube, it can do PlayStation 2, it can do 3DS, PSP, and of course, everything under. I wouldn't buy this for any Nintendo Switch emulation. It's not good for that, and you won't have custom drivers because it's a Mali GPU. But for everything else, I think the sweet spot is kind of the native to 2x resolution for GameCube, PS2, 3DS. PSP, you can go a lot higher, but that's kind of the top end of where you expect this device to go. Now, obviously knowing that PS2 emulation is kind of non-existent on Android, so you're kind of stuck with what performance is available to you by the emulator. And we've had issues now with 3DS, so just know what you're getting into with Android emulation. But if you want to play GameCube, PS2, PSP, 3DS, and everything under, you can't go wrong with this device. It is fantastic. It is great for that purpose. For PSP, it's one that you can basically just set and forget. And I basically just set it to a 4x resolution for full 1080p support. And the catalog of PSP games just played great. I didn't really run into any issues, and it was perfect for PSP. So if that's what you're looking for, then it's fantastic. For GameCube and Wii, it was a different story. I had to run a 2x resolution out of the box, so 720p. And there are some games that you might have to drop down to a 1x or might not play and things like that. Same as any normal GameCube, PS2, all of that, because emulation just isn't there for every single game. But if you switch to Vulkan, you can get really good performance for a lot of games. Might have to go OpenGL for some. Either way, just get it into your head that if you are buying this device, it isn't a pick up and play out of the box, everything will run. You will have to fiddle around with settings, change from OpenGL to Vulkan, maybe turn on VBI skip, and some other hacks to get some games to run. But other than that, most GameCube, Wii games are going to run just great at a 2x resolution. And just on that tweaking note, we come to PS2 emulation, and that's where things become a little bit more hazy when it comes to tweaking. This isn't going to be a scenario where, like GameCube, you could just go 2x and most games will run. For the most part, you're going to have to do a per game tweak for a lot of PS2 games just because that's how PS2 emulation is. So you're going to run into Vulkan, you're going to run into having to do cycle skip underclocking and all of that sort of thing. And if you aren't familiar enough with it on the PS2 end, then you're going to have to learn a little bit about how to tweak things on PS2. But either way, once you do all of that, you can get a lot of the PS2 library running really well. And as long as you're okay with a 1x or a 2x resolution, this device is more than capable and more than fine to do all of that. For 3DS, and I used a combination of Citra Canary and Citra MMJ throughout my testing. Citra Canary for me just comes out a little bit ahead in my performance testing, and just I prefer using it. You can basically do a 2 to 3x resolution for 3DS games and get away with it. 2x for the whole catalog if you want to just leave it. 3x you can stretch on some games and just have a good time there. But for the most part, 3DS emulation is a little still hit and miss in a lot of ways. You still get those compilation stutters, you still get some games that just aren't going to run well and all that sort of thing, but the majority of 3DS games you're not going to have a problem with. But generally, after following my setup guide for this device and getting it all ready to go, you won't have any issues just booting up a game and playing. For the most part, you can just do that for majority of titles, and it's only going to be a handful that you have to just go in and maybe play with some settings just to get it to run a little bit better. Last on my list for what's great about this device is, and it's going to be surprising, but it's the software. Look, I know, I personally would never have thought that I would praise Anbernic on software. And I guess they just did something special here because the actual Android build that's available to you here is actually really good and it's really well done. And it's surprising for Anbernic to just get that right on the first try. There's no over sharpening. L2 and R2 mode work for Xbox streaming, for COD Mobile, and the entire experience has just been smooth and fast. And you also have control over the fan and the LED lights. There's actually nothing else that I could think of that needs to be added to this besides maybe a per game override so that you can have Xbox mode for certain apps and NS mode for other apps, and that way you don't have to swap between them. Other than that, it kind of has everything else. And so the scenario ends up becoming that we're not going to get Gamma OS on here. It doesn't look likely, so we're stuck with Anbernic's Android build. But from what I can tell, it's not a loss at all. The Android build is great. Now let's talk about the good, and I'm going to start with the buttons and the D-pad. On the button side, I'm a really big fan of these. They're nice and big, they stick out quite a bit, and they have a great feel and travel to them. Now there is one big knock to them, and there's a bit of a grating sound that you can hear if you push them from side to side and just play around with the buttons. And I'm going to have you listen to it now. It's a weird sound. I actually haven't heard this on any other device, so I'm not sure what's going on here. I wouldn't say it's a big issue while you're playing, but if you go ahead and look for it, it becomes something that you notice all the time. The D-pad on the other end is kind of slippery, and it's still prone to false diagonals as most Anbernic devices are. I'm not a big fighting game person, but I am a Pokemon guy, and you can see here how the character moves in other directions besides the one that you're pushing down on. Personally, I find this D-pad to be pretty much the same as every other Anbernic D-pad. It's just fine. It's not great, it's not good, it's not bad, it's fine. It's usable in every way that that word means, but you're not going to be sitting there praising the D-pad at the end of the day saying this is awesome. So put it that way. Moving on to the L1 and R1 and the triggers, and we have actual analog triggers here for once. And you can see it in the gamepad tester that we have each percentage covered for using them. I've had no issues with the triggers, they feel great, and they have a really strong resistance. They're well made, and they're actually really good triggers. Same goes with the L1 and R1 buttons, with my only complaint being that the L1 and R1 can be a little bit on the loud side. But otherwise, I have no concerns. Last on my list of good, and I wouldn't say this is good, this is more average or fine, same as the D-pad, but it's the speakers. Now, they're down-firing speakers, and everybody knows I do not like down-firing speakers, so that's a knock against it. But they're fine sounding. They're not exactly terrible, they're good enough for down-firing that it's just fine, but I'm not going to give it any points for it. They could have done a lot better. There's a lot of space to work with on this device that we could have had front-firing speakers, but we don't. So let's just have a quick listen compared to the Retroid Pocket 2S, and you can get an idea of how they sound compared to a device that's about half the price. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what I mean. Like I said, they're fine and they're serviceable, but they could be better. Also, I would get in trouble by a particular Discord user, number 27, if I didn't mention that this device actually has stereo rumble, or whatever stereo rumble means to him. Basically means that there's rumble on both sides of the device, so you can feel it on both sides of the device. And I've never really looked into rumble for most devices. I don't turn it on, I don't keep it, but apparently that's an abnormal thing. And so just be aware if you're somebody or one of the 5 people that care about rumble, it has stereo rumble, and I guess that's pretty cool. And then we come to the bad, and there's 2 things on my list. This was always going to be my complaint. Even if they were good Switch sticks, which they aren't, I don't like the fact that we're still using Switch sticks on a full-size device like this. Anbernic really needs to move to full-size sticks and move away from Switch sticks, especially on bigger devices like this. But they stuck with Switch sticks, and they stuck with sticks that actually have quite a bit of issues. Even after replacing them with GuliKit sticks, it's still not perfect. It gives you a better range of motion compared to the original sticks, but they're still having issues with just snapping to different directions in the 4 cardinal directions. They're better than the review units were, from what I understand, so they did make a change at some point between review units and retail units, but they still haven't gone the full way. From my understanding, the rest of it needs to be a software fix, and I don't know if they're going to do that. I don't know when it might happen. I have no idea what their plans are. I didn't have a review unit. This is an actual retail unit that was sent to me by Go Game Geek, and we'll talk about them later. So I don't know what that looked like from review to retail to GuliKit, but from what I understand, the next step is on them, and they have to do a software update for us to get the full range of motion from these sticks to be a little bit better. But more importantly, and more towards something that I care about, because I could live with these sticks, they're not great, but I could live with them. The Wi-Fi performance in this device is atrocious. I have no easy way or good way to put this, but the Wi-Fi chip in this or the antenna or both are on the very low to cheap end. And something happened here that I don't know what, but it's not a good device for streaming. It reminds me of the Miu Mini Plus in that way. If anybody that has a Miu Mini Plus, they know that the Wi-Fi chip in that device is bad. The range is bad. You can actually see how performant it gets for Wi-Fi as you move that device closer to your access point. And as you move it away, you can see it just die, especially if you're only 6 feet away from your access point. Sometimes you have to put it right up next to it. This device is in many ways very similar to that. I actually wasted my entire weekend testing streaming on this device. For anybody that knows me, they know that streaming for me is a big thing. I stream on multiple different devices. I love streaming, from Moonlight to XP Play, PS Play, local streaming, remote streaming, all of it. I'm very familiar and very in tune with streaming. I do setup guides for it. That's how far I get with streaming. And so when I get a device that doesn't perform well in streaming, it's a bit of a weird thing, because I'm like, what exactly is going on here? Especially when this device, compared to every other one, is the only one having issues. And so I checked it. I pulled out my Odin 2, pulled out a phone, pulled out tablet, pulled out the Retroid Pocket Flip, the RG405M, the Retroid Pocket 2S, pulled out every device that I could find that I could do speed tests on, and just compared them. And I went different distances from my access point and all that sort of thing. And the one constant was that the RG556 struggled. In every single situation, it was a struggle. And it was a scenario where the speed might look great. So you're going to see 180 megabytes per second, 100 megabytes per second. And you might be thinking, well, that's good. I don't know what he's complaining about. But when it's 100 megabytes per second and the Odin 2 is getting 400, something is wrong. And it's a scenario too where if you get that 100 megabytes per second and you're walking closer to the access point and you put it up next to it and it's still only getting 130, 140, and you're seeing devices like the Retroid Pocket Flip or the RG405M get double or triple that, something's wrong with it. And it even came through while playing games. I was streaming a lot of Moonlight, I was streaming a lot of PS Play, XP Play, and the one constant was this device, the RG556, had a lot of issues with streaming. And the performance, the stuttering, the lagging, all of that was existing on this device where it doesn't exist on any other of my devices. So it's something weird and specific to this, and I can only point to the Wi-Fi chip. So from my perspective, I can't really recommend it for streaming. I don't know if your mileage might vary and your network might be better and all that sort of thing, but I know it's not a network issue. My network is Wi-Fi 6E with 5 gigahertz access points everywhere. I'm full covered. I'm a perfect network situation, and all of my other devices are perfect for all of the streaming that I do. It is this one specific device that just doesn't seem to like it, and after all of my testing, the only thing I can conclude is that the Wi-Fi chip is not very good. And so from my perspective for review, I just can't recommend it for streaming as much as I want to, because a 1080p 5.5-inch OLED would be perfect for streaming, even with the crappy sticks, but I can't. And so I'm not even going to be using it for streaming personally. And that's unfortunate because I would love to. Now, before we get into the next section, I want to talk about price. And the main reason is because this device has had so many different prices from pre-order to what it is right now. You could have been looking at anything from $100 through some TikTok stuff, all the way up to $260. So it's a huge range, and there isn't a good constant when it comes to pricing on this device. Now, a lot of people were able to get it at the $160 pre-order price that I shared so many different times from GoGameGeek as well as eBay and other avenues. It was $160 for a long time. And by the way, special thanks to GoGameGeek for sending me this device for review. As usual, they have no input in what I say. They haven't seen this review ahead of time. But they're an awesome store for reselling these kind of devices, and so I suggest that you check them out, and I'll have a link in the description to where you can buy this if you want it. But after release, the device pricing shot up, and we knew that because Anbernic said that there was going to be a discount for pre-order, and then it raised up. As of right now, the pricing from Go Game Geek is $195 with the PB44 coupon. Not sure how long that'll last, but that seems to be the best price that you can purchase this from any retailer, from what I can understand. So check that out. But I have to say, $160 is an absolute steal for this. $195 is a really good price, but obviously $160 is going to be better. So that's my rundown of this device. And if you can't tell, I obviously love it. This is a keeper device to me, the best under $200 in my mind. But people are going to start asking questions. How does it compare to the Odin 2? I've had that question a lot. And how does it compare to the Retro Pocket 4 and 4 Pro? So instead of me doing that off camera, let's talk it through now. The elephant in the room is obviously the Retro Pocket 4 and 4 Pro. Out of every device in the sub $200 category, those are the only two comparables to the RG556 right now. And in the absolute nicest way possible, neither of those two devices, in my mind, hold a candle to the RG556. This is obviously my personal opinion and what I personally value, but for me, comfort, ergonomics, the screen, all of that are top priorities to me. And this is a night and day difference compared to something like the Retro Pocket 4 and 4 Pro. As you know, the comfort on this I consider as probably the best that I've ever held. The screen is an OLED screen. It is absolutely fantastic. And so when you combine both of those over the Retro Pocket 4 and 4 Pro, it is a big difference. And for me, that comes out ahead. But there are some differences. For the Retro Pocket 4 Pro, it's obviously going to be a lot more pocketable. It's smaller than this is. And on top of that, there's a lot more power in the Retro Pocket 4 Pro. It has better D-pad and it has better sticks. So if those things matter to you, if all of those matter to you and comfort and ergonomics and screen don't, then you should go for the Retro Pocket 4 Pro instead. But for me, the comfort and ergonomics and the screen matter a lot more. And then we come to the big guy, the head honcho, the number one, the AYN Odin 2. The base Odin 2 is $321 shipped. The Anbernic RG556, as we talked about, is $195 shipped. That's a difference of $126 between the two of them. So let's tackle it from two different sides. If you're somebody that doesn't own an Odin 2 right now, and you're considering it versus the RG556, which one should you buy? Well, as somebody who owns both of the devices, the RG556 wins over the Odin 2 in screen, comfort, ergonomics, and weight. It's 331 grams and the Odin 2 is 420 grams, plus the price, obviously. But the Odin 2 isn't a slouch in those departments either. This isn't a scenario where the 556 is a 10 out of 10 and the Odin 2 is a 1 out of 10. This is a scenario where the Odin 2 is a 9 out of 10 and the 556 is a 10 out of 10 in those categories that I mentioned. The Odin 2 doesn't have a bad screen, it doesn't have bad comfort, and the weight it's not a heavy device. So it's just a scenario where this comes out ahead by being kind of a master in OLED and a master in comfort and a master in all of those sort of things, but the Odin 2 isn't far behind. However, the Odin 2 does win on every other metric. And so performance, the sticks, the D-pad, the battery life, and more. Out of the two, the Odin 2 also has a better out-of-the-box experience because you can just brute force a lot of games that you can't on the 556, and so you have a better experience of just not having to fool around with so many different games to get them to run because they just run on the Odin 2. The performance difference between the two devices shouldn't be understated. This is kind of a Corolla 556 versus a Ferrari Odin 2. So it's not something that's even anywhere close in the same realm or same possibilities. It's a very big difference. The Odin 2 can play Switch games and all the sort of things that add up that a lot more of the performance starts to come out ahead. Plus, there's the whole game streaming aspect, and the Odin 2 has been fantastic for game streaming on my end. So the obvious answer, if you're looking at both of these, is all of that worth the $126 difference? In my mind, it would be, but it all depends on what your budget is. But if you're considering both of these devices, then I'm going to assume that you don't have a budget, in which case the Odin 2 would come out ahead. Now, on the other side of the fence, if you have an Odin 2, is the Anbernic RG556 worth purchasing? And my personal answer is no, there isn't a good reason why you would buy this if you have an Odin 2. Unless for some reason you're like, I really don't like the comfort and ergonomics of the Odin 2 and I don't like the screen of the Odin 2, in which case this comes out ahead. But then look back at what I just talked about for all of the other positives the Odin 2 has, and I don't see a reason why you would use both devices at the same time. If anything, you would probably get this and play with it for 2 weeks, look at both of them and then be like, why do I have both of these devices? I'm just going to sell one. And at that point, it's probably going to be the 556 that you sell. So that's my answer on all of those different situations. And that's going to be it for this video, a very long review video. I think at the end of this year, I'm going to look back and the 556 is either going to be a top 3 device for me, or it might be the best device of 2024, because that's how I feel about it. It is fantastic and I love it, and I'm glad that Anbernic came out with it. Let me know in the comments below if this is on your radar at all. I don't know if a lot of people are even looking at this. I haven't seen a lot of hype around it, but I think as people start to get it more, the kind of groundswell will start building up and we'll start seeing a lot more people vying for this device. I think that's happening. I think everybody knows that I wasn't really interested in this device at all before I got it, but obviously since getting it, my tune has changed quite a bit. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow, and hope you all have a good one.